Towards the end of 1922, the Communist International, Comintern, began to consider how they would succeed taking over Europe in the most effective way. On Lenin's initiative, a meeting was organized at the Marx-Engels Institute in Moscow. The aim of the meeting was to start the Marx Cultural Revolution. Among those present at the meeting was George Lukács, a Jewish Hungarian aristocrat and a son of a banker. In the summer of 1924, Lukács moved to Germany. Here he held the first meeting of a group of communist-oriented intellectuals. This gathering was to lead the foundation of the Frankfurt School. The institute had been officially established and funded by the Jewish millionaire Felix Weil. This institute was called the Institute for Social Research. Later it would be known as the Frankfurt School. These new Marxists, under the direction of Max Horkheimer, believed that Europeans were too attached to tradition, race, nation, family, and faith to be able to accept communism. Antonio Gramsci, while in prison, described that Marxism and communism could only flourish after a long march through the cultural institutions. Only then, after they had corrupted all Western values and made life impossible for us, could they impose the dictatorship of the proletariat. This was also what the Fabian socialists did to weaken the countries and slowly implementing international communism. The mantra would now be change and destroy Western culture before communism would be accepted. George Lukács believed that for a new communist culture to emerge, the existing European culture had to be destroyed. There is no other way to get control of a society with strong moral values than to weaken those values. He said, "I saw the revolutionary destruction of society as the one and only solution to the cultural contradictions of the epoch. Such a worldwide overturning of values cannot take place without the annihilation of the old values and the creation of new ones by the revolutionaries." Willy Munzenberg said, "We must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink. Only then, after they had corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose the dictatorship of the proletariat." Out of this came cultural Marxism, this subversive ideology which meant that gender, sexual orientation, family, race, culture, or religion, every single aspect of a white person's identity was to be questioned, every norm or standard in a society challenged and ideally altered and demolished in order to benefit supposedly oppressed groups instead of Europeans. This would supposedly create a society in which the Jews would not be seen as an outside distinctive class, where they could feel safer to climb to the highest positions in society without encountering much opposition from Europeans. The entire purpose of cultural Marxism was to delegitimize and banish European ethnic interests and replace them with minorities.
When I started writing about Jewish intellectual movements, I realized I couldn't just go around counting Jews. And what I had to show was that you had a cohesive core of Jews that were mutually reinforcing each other, that they were the backbone of this movement. And I had to show that these people identified as Jews. And I had to show that they viewed what they were doing as furthering specific Jewish goals. For example, one of the most common things was that they were concerned about anti-Semitism. Quite a bit of my writing in my book, The Culture of Critique, was to show that the Jews who were the center of these Jewish intellectual movements were very concerned about issues like anti-Semitism, that they were trying to develop theories in which anti-Semitism was a pathology, in which anti-Semitism had no intellectual basis, in which it was just morally beyond the pale. The important thing was to show that Jewish identification was important and furthering of a specific Jewish goal. Now, that's not to say that this was a goal that all Jews have. We're not saying that all Jews are anything, as a matter of fact. For example, psychoanalysis had specific goals. They were concerned about anti-Semitism. But that doesn't mean that most Jews even believe in psychoanalysis or anything else. We're talking about a cohesive group of people. It's very easy to show that the Frankfurt School intellectuals, Max Horkheimer, Adorno and these other prominent Frankfurt School people had strong Jewish identities. Franz Boas, the famous anthropologist, very strong Jewish identity, a very deep concern with specific Jewish issues like anti-Semitism, and that they saw their particular intellectual endeavors as advancing specific Jewish goals. There's nothing wrong with advancing your own goals. That's what we all do. The only thing is that those goals oftentimes conflict with those of other people. And so essentially, for example, at the Frankfurt School, he developed an ideology in which any group identification that a non-Jew had was considered a pathology. So that if someone like me identified as a white person and had, felt I had interest as a white person, well, that was viewed as a psychiatric disorder. There was never any mention about Jews with a very strong sense of Jewish identity and Jewish interest, that there was anything wrong with them. It was an ideology that that really framed adaptive behaviors of non-Jews as pathological. Even family life, that non-Jews with strong family ties and so on, there was something wrong with them. Their families were authoritarian, and they did all the psychoanalytic stuff to try to prove that sort of thing. But it was just, made-up science and no scientific basis at all.
After Marx, there were a group of Marxists who wisely decided that you could bring this collectivist society to a nation through culture as well, by introducing certain values and concepts that would break down the family, for example. If you could somehow break down the family unit so that it was no longer self-sustaining and no longer valued in a society, then that would leave individual members who formerly could turn to the family for support in times of need. They would now be cut loose. They would be without a place to go in times of need. So now they have to turn to the government. So cultural Marxism would be that type of activity in any society that breaks down the culture in such a way so that people instinctively turn to government as an alternative for the support that they otherwise would have. This is done through art, it's through music, it's through literature, it's through motion pictures and that kind of thing. The implanting of certain ideas and concepts which make them very ripe for the philosophy of collectivism and makes them very ripe for turning to government as the big daddy, the big solver of all problems. Collectivism implies that if something is important enough, then the state should step in and make sure that everybody conforms, whether they want to or not.
The whole point of a socialistic society is to do four things. Marx talks about destroying the family, 2, destroying property, 3, destroying religion, and 4, destroying the nation. And what you end up with is the gulag, where the whole country becomes the Soviet Union.
Almost every movie that Hollywood puts out today must depict characters with at least one of the following attributes. 1, the protagonist and/or the antagonist are divorced. 2, the female is portrayed as dominant, controlling, violent, and/or one-up on men. 3, the male is portrayed as aloof, feminine, overly sensitive, and/or cheating. 4, somewhere in the family, at least one of its immediate members must be a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or a women's liver. Often, attributes are mixed in various proportions, and even mixed with a touch of schizophrenia, as males and females swap roles in fluorescence.
One of the big themes in movies in recent years has been that the whites have almost tended to disappear from positions of being heroes, of being sort of idealized or something like that. In the place you have people like Morgan Freeman, who's cast as very responsible, moral, godlike figure, and so on. Or you have action figures like Will Smith and Wesley Snipes and so on. So you have an awful lot of sort of displacement of whites as media images in the last few decades. And whites are all often criminals. You often have blonde-haired, blue-eyed people playing criminal roles, playing people who are dishonest or weak or subservient, and the black characters being very strong, very wise. You'll often see, of course, black computer technicians, black scientists, black teachers and professors who are very wise and understand everything. Whites are portrayed as stupid, oftentimes as irresponsible, oftentimes as needing the advice of black people or other minorities. It's really the visual displacement of whites from center stage to the periphery. And I think this is preparing the white people for their displacement in the culture as a whole.
Göran Rosenberg, Swedish Jewish author and journalist, explains the drive behind the push for destroying white countries by means of cultural Marxism. Historically, Jews had always thrived in nations and empires with multicultural, pluralistic, and tolerant environments, while they fared badly in strong ethnic or nationalistic societies. European Jews have always been the emblematic stranger or other. Therefore, by definition, a society where the stranger is welcome is good for the Jews. The future of European Jewry is dependent on our ability to shape a multicultural, pluralistic, and diverse society. The website smashculturalmarxism.com explains the phenomenon of cultural Marxism extremely well. Cultural Marxism, or cultural Bolshevism, degenerate culture, seeks to destroy everything good about society, what holds it together, what helps it to advance, what promotes intelligence and beauty. It seeks to degenerate society and take it to a lower form where people are less intelligent and more animal. It's based on the Marxist lie that everything good about society is all form of oppression. Every time anyone promotes cultural Marxism, they use the same line claiming it's about freeing people from oppression. These common cultural Marxist themes are all promoted by the same lie that they are done in the name of freedom. Liberalism, sexual perversion, degenerate art, degenerate music, mass immigration, anti-intelligence, and a promotion of people acting like animals, corrupted versions of feminism, multiculturalism, oppressing people of European ancestry, and destroying nationalism and destroying non-Jewish religion. Cultural Marxism is largely a synthesis of Marx and Freud. It is Marxism as applied in the cultural sphere and the analysis and control of the media, art, theater, film, and other cultural institutions in society, often with an emphasis on class, gender, and race. As a form of political analysis, cultural Marxism gained strength in the 1920s and was the model used by a group of intellectuals in Germany known as the Frankfurt School, and later by another group of intellectuals at the Center of Contemporary Cultural Studies in Birmingham, England. The fields of cultural studies and critical theory are rooted in and influenced by work of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is formulated as a way to subvert European nations and civilization using methods other than direct political action. Theodor Adorno was also an original member of the Frankfurt School. With the help of the American Jewish Committee, he wrote a book entitled The Authoritarian Personality. The book's purpose was to make every group affiliation sound as if it were a sign of mental disorder. Patriotism, religion, family, and race loyalty were signs of a dangerous and defective authoritarian personality. The school's critical theory preached that the authoritarian personality was a product of the patriarchal family. This was one of the basic principles of cultural Marxism, the need to break down the family unit.
Frankfurt School, at its base, developed the ideology that you had to sort of reject your family. By rejecting your family, you would then be more likely to accept, or you would be less likely to be anti-Jewish. And so, you know, it's a remarkable thing because they never supposed that Jewish children should reject their parents. If we're going to promulgate Judaism to the next generation, you have to have children who identify with their parents. But in the authoritarian personality, identifying with your parents, who were Christian especially, was the epitome of pathology. This had to be eradicated. What you see with the authoritarian personality is holding out individualism, radical individualism, as a cultural ideal. Now, of course, individualism is a long roots in European society. But what you're talking about with radical individualism is giving up all your allegiances. You just become the isolated individual. This is not a prescription that Jews have ever adopted. I mean, if there's anything that is characteristic of Judaism, it's a strong sense of identification with a group. So essentially this is a prescription for the behavior of Gentiles that would essentially make them less likely to have allegiances with other groups. Because from the standpoint of Jews, what is the most terrifying thing is a group of non-Jews united by an ideology where they have a strong sense of group membership and which Jews are viewed negatively. I mean, the paradigm of that would be, of course, National Socialism in Germany from 1933 to 1945. Fundamentally, what Nazism was about was having a strong sense of being a member of a nation, having a strong sense that you're part of an in-group, and these other people are not, you're not on their page, Jews especially. And so one way to get rid of that, basically, is to advocate individualism for everybody. Get rid of your allegiances. Don't have any allegiance to religion, country, race, even family. And again, one of the points I keep making there is that this is completely hypocritical, because to be a strong identified Jew means that you are highly connected to a group, that you have a strong sense of group membership, that you think of outgroups as potentially threatening, as enemies, and so on. In other words, the psychological processes of group membership tend to make us view negatively the people in other groups, and that applies to Jews as well as anybody else. So strongly identified Jews tend to have strongly positive views of their in-group, strongly negative views of the outsiders. And that's part of the cultural critique. These Jewish intellectuals have very negative views about the culture and peoples of the outside them.
In the book, Adorno defined parenthood, pride in one's family, Christianity, adherence to traditional gender roles, and attitudes towards sex, and the love of one's own country as pathological phenomena. Cultural Marxists wanted to create conflict between the oppressed minority and the oppressing majority, between those with alleged privilege and those without it. The working class had been replaced by minorities. All allegiance to family, nation, and culture was seen as major obstacles and sources of anti-Semitism. In order for them to get rid of all resistance to the Jewish interest, it would have to be crushed and eroded within every white person. Nationalism, racial realism, heterosexuality, sovereignty, homogeneity, traditionalism, loyalty, and the nuclear family were looked upon as major obstacles to the communist takeover of Western civilization. Thus, the cultural Marxists came up with ways of gradually breaking up our culture from within. The Marxist idea of equality is not actually possible to achieve in reality. It is only about bringing down the ones who stand out, the successful, the hardworking achievers, to the same level as those who do nothing, fail, and are lazy. This is how you make everyone quote-unquote equal. To undermine Western civilization, the Jewish extremists called for the most negative and destructive criticism possible of every sphere of the Gentiles' life. Their anti-white policies, they anticipated, would later spread like a virus. Cultural Marxism has given us anti-white policies such as racism offenses and hate speech laws, gender confusion, hookup culture, moral and gender racial relativization, homosexualization of children, mass immigration, racial tensions, forced multiculturalism, the systematic promotion of sexual deviances in society, an unreliable legal system with bias against the victim of the crimes, the breakdown of the nuclear family, and low birth rates. Notable philosophers from the Frankfurt School were Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Walter Benjamin, Erich Fromm, Friedrich Pollock, Leo Leventhal, Jürgen Habermas, Alfred Schmidt, Axel Honneth, Siegfried Kakauer, George Lukács. All of these intellectuals at the Frankfurt School were Jewish. The intellectuals were first to be targeted in all communist states. Free thinking is dangerous to the system. Social justice and feminism, to name but a few, are all anti-white, anti-free speech movements inspired by and born out of critical theory, and thus come under the umbrella of cultural Marxism. A popular manifestation of cultural Marxism is also political correctness, which the great English writer Theodore Dalrymple eloquently defines like this. In my study of communist societies, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of communist propaganda was not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate, and therefore the less it corresponded to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent when they are being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose once and for all their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is, in some way, to become evil oneself. One standing to resist anything is thus eroded, and even destroyed. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control. I think if you examine political correctness, it has the same effect and is intended to.